The night sky burned red over the wild ridge of the frontier world, a planet so dangerous that even the Galactic Council labeled it a place where no civilized being should ever set foot. The trees here moved like living things, their bark hard as steel, their roots thirsty for blood. Creatures with jagged armor and silent steps prowled the mist, and storms rolled down from the mountains without warning, slicing through anything soft and slow. For centuries, one name had echoed through the few scattered settlements clinging to this world, a name spoken with both fear and reverence. She was the only one who had survived here alone, the alien girl they called the Deathborn. She had been born in the forests, raised by storms, shaped by the hunger of the land. She thought she was the strongest thing alive, and for most of her life she was right. That was before the day she saw the ship, black, scorched, unmistakably Terran, cut through the storm clouds and land in the valley below. She crouched on the cliff edge, her silver hair clinging to her sharp, pale face as the rain whipped across her skin. She had killed beasts with her bare hands, outrun fire, broken stone, and silenced entire hunting packs. No one had ever come to this world and survived for long. The Council had abandoned the idea of taming it centuries ago. But this ship was different. Its descent was controlled, confident, as if the creature inside had looked at the death world and said, "I am not afraid." Her amber eyes narrowed as the Terran insignia gleamed against the lightning. Humanity. She had heard their name whispered by passing Council ships, words dipped in caution and unease. A primitive species from the edge of the galaxy, they said, violent and unpredictable. But she had never seen one up close. She expected something fragile. She expected weakness. Instead, she felt the air itself grow colder when the ramp opened. He stepped out slowly, like someone walking into a home he already understood. No armor that glimmered like the Council's gold. No guards. Just a single human in a dark, matte suit streaked with mud and battle scars. His boots sank into the blood-rich soil, and he didn't flinch when the shriek of a predator cut through the mist. The alien girl narrowed her eyes from her perch, watching him. Every creature she had ever met showed fear when the forest spoke. But he only tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging the sound. He began walking, not toward a city or a beacon, but deeper into the heart of the death world, toward the place where even she did not go without thought. Something about the way he moved unsettled her. He didn't look like prey. Days passed like a slow hunt. She followed him through the storm-filled valleys, through trees whose roots could crush a starship. She watched him face what the Council called uninhabitable. He didn't avoid the predators. He met them. The first beast came at him at dusk, a towering thing with plates of bone like a living tank. She expected him to run. Instead, he waited. Then, with quiet precision, he moved. A strike. A roar. And the beast fell, not torn apart by some weapon of destruction, but by hands that moved like they had done this before. The alien girl had lived her whole life believing she was the only creature who belonged on this world. Watching him kill what she'd once called unbeatable shattered something inside her. The human wasn't just surviving. He was claiming the land beneath his boots. The forest tested him again and again. A lightning storm that split stone. Poisonous fog that even she avoided. Clawwing swarms. He endured them all with the same strange stillness. She watched as he built fires that didn't die in the wind, shelters that stood against the rage of the skies. He didn't conquer the land with arrogance like the Council explorers. He moved with it, like a creature born from the same cruel soil. She began to understand why the Council whispered about humanity in fear. They weren't powerful because they had fleets. They were powerful because they refused to break. He reminded her of the storms. Relentless, quiet, unstoppable. When she finally revealed herself, it was not by accident. She stood before him in the deep forest where the ground steamed from acid rain and the beasts howled in the dark. Her blade gleamed at her hip, her stance sharp, ready to test him. He didn't even draw his weapon. He just looked at her with that calm, searching gaze. "You've been following me," he said. His voice wasn't a question. It was a fact. No one had ever spoken to her like that, without fear, without hesitation. "You're human," she said, her voice steady but curious. "And you're still alive." His lips twitched into something like a smile. "I could say the same about you." The tension between them felt like two storms meeting at the edge of a cliff. She circled him, expecting him to strike first. Instead, he reached into his pack and threw something at her feet. A sealed ration pack. Food. Not as a bribe. As an offering between predators. She didn't move at first, then crouched and tore it open, the strange warmth filling her hands. No one had ever offered her anything in this world. This death world didn't give. It only took. That small act was louder than any weapon. In that moment, she realized he wasn't here to challenge her. He was here to exist beside her. They moved together after that, at first reluctantly, then instinctively. She showed him the places where the ground swallowed the careless alive, and he showed her ways to make fire burn hotter through acid fog. They hunted together in silence, their movements in sync without ever agreeing to anything. When a night storm brought a horde of bone beasts down from the ridge, they stood back to back, tearing through monsters like two blades of the same weapon. She had always thought she was alone in her strength, unique in her ferocity. But he fought like someone who had carried a harder war on his shoulders and walked away from it. She could feel it in the way he didn't flinch when death came close. She had always considered herself the predator of this world. But he was something else entirely. When she finally asked him why he came to this cursed place, his answer was simple and terrifying. "Because it's dangerous," he said. "And that's where we belong." Humanity had always been misunderstood by the galaxy. The Council saw them as reckless savages who built empires on broken ground. The other species saw them as dangerous outsiders who smiled too calmly in places that should have broken them. But standing beside him, she understood something the galaxy never would. Humans didn't seek safety. They grew stronger in the fire. The alien girl had spent her entire life believing she was the strongest thing that walked this world. But as she stood beside the human under the black storm sky, watching him wipe blood from his hands with quiet ease, she realized strength wasn't about being alone. It was about being the kind of creature the world itself couldn't defeat. She had been shaped by her planet. He had been forged by something far worse, by a species that had learned to survive not by avoiding death, but by meeting it head-on. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the storm. She had met another one, and this storm had a human face. The Council would never understand why Deathworlders feared humans until it was too late. She did. She had seen it in the way he moved through a world designed to kill him and called it home. She had seen it in the way he didn't fight for dominance, but simply claimed his place as if no other reality existed. That night, as the fire burned against the acidic wind and predators circled in the darkness, she didn't see a stranger anymore. She saw the truth of what humanity was: dangerous, enduring, unyielding, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that the galaxy would tremble when it finally realized it too. Thank you for listening to this HFY Sci-Fi story. If you enjoyed this cinematic journey into humanity's unbreakable nature, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories about humans in space. Your support helps keep these stories alive among the stars. The storm returned the next night like it always did on this cursed world, sliding down from the black ridge with claws made of wind and rain sharp enough to cut flesh. The alien girl moved through the forest like a shadow, her bare feet making no sound against the thick, wet earth. Her eyes locked on the small trail of smoke curling upward from the valley below. She'd been tracking him for nearly 2 days now, weaving through traps, sinking past sinkholes, slipping through roots that could crush a body like dry wood. She had expected this human to die within hours of stepping foot on her world. Every creature that came here eventually screamed. But he hadn't screamed. He hadn't stumbled. And worst of all, he hadn't run. He had walked deeper, farther than anyone she had ever seen before. From her perch on a broken tree trunk, she watched him moving through the clearing like he'd lived here for years. His fire was low and steady, the kind that didn't give away its position to the hunters in the mist. He'd built a shelter from the bones of a storm beast, creatures so dangerous that even she avoided them unless she had no choice. His movements were slow, methodical, and entirely without fear. She narrowed her eyes, No one survived a storm beast alone. But the carcass next to him said otherwise. His throat had been cleanly cut. No stray wounds. No panic. One strike. One kill. Her heartbeat quickened. Even she couldn't do that without a fight. She crouched lower, her breathing shallow, studying every detail. He didn't look like the council soldiers she had killed years ago. Their faces had been polished, their armor gleaming, their hands soft. This one was scarred, his gear patched and worn, his shoulders hard from carrying weight, not titles. He moved like a hunter who had spent a lifetime in hostile places. A part of her hated that she felt something she hadn't felt in years, unease. He wasn't just surviving this death world. He was becoming a part of it. The rain thickened, hitting the ground in heavy drops that soaked everything. She leapt soundlessly from the tree and landed closer, hidden behind a jagged stone that had split the earth like a scar. She could smell the storm beast's blood mixing with the wet soil. It was still fresh. He'd killed it recently. That meant she'd been closer to him than she thought, and he hadn't even looked back. Either he hadn't noticed her, or worse, he had and didn't care. Her kind was feared for their strength, but she was feared most of all. She had been born here. She could hear the breath of things in the dark. But him? He wasn't breathing like prey. He was breathing like the storm. The first predator arrived just after nightfall. A crawler, low to the ground, armored like living iron. Its red eyes glowed faintly in the dark, its movements silent. She'd killed hundreds of them, but she knew they were merciless to outsiders. It crept toward his shelter, its claws sinking into the mud. She waited to see how long it would take for him to notice. Most died within seconds. He didn't flinch. He reached for his knife, an ordinary Terran blade, nothing special. Then he stood up and met the creature head-on. The fight was over before it began. One step, one strike. The crawler let out a sound like grinding metal and collapsed in the mud. Its throat opened cleanly. No wasted movement. No fear. He didn't even seem winded. She pressed her back against the rock, her heart thudding against her chest. Not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Curiosity. She had spent her entire life thinking she was the apex predator of this world. Everything else bled beneath her hands. But watching him move was like seeing a mirror she hadn't known existed. Hours passed, but the storm didn't ease. He sat near the fire with his back against the carcass of the crawler, carving its armored hide into clean sheets. Not for trophies, for tools. The way he worked told her everything she needed to know. He had done this before. Not here, but somewhere just as cruel. She wondered how many worlds had tried to kill him and failed. The council called humanity dangerous. She had always dismissed that as political noise. But now she understood why the galaxy whispered their name like a warning. Lightning split the sky. He froze for a heartbeat, not in fear, but in focus. His head turned slightly toward the direction of the ridge. She inhaled sharply. She hadn't made a sound. And yet, he knew. His eyes flicked toward her hiding place. Sharp, unblinking. She stiffened behind the stone, not out of fear but instinct, the kind that told her she wasn't hunting him anymore. He was aware of her, and he wasn't alarmed. He was waiting. She considered slipping away into the forest, vanishing as she'd done to countless others. But something in his stillness anchored her there. Most who saw her either ran or attacked without thought. He did neither. He simply reached into his pack, tore off a strip of dried meat, and tossed it into the shadows. Her shadows. The meat landed a few feet away, hissing softly as the rain hit it. He wasn't threatening her. He wasn't afraid of her. He was inviting her. Her jaw tightened. This was absurd. She was the death-born of this world, the one the forest had raised. She had crushed creatures that the council called unkillable. She didn't take gifts from anyone. And yet, something about the quiet way he threw that food made it feel less like pity and more like respect. She hated that she understood it. Slowly, she stepped out from behind the stone, her blade lowered but ready. His gaze didn't shift. He didn't speak. He just watched her with the same calm he'd given the storm beast earlier. She walked closer, the rain pounding around them, the mud sucking at her boots. Every step she took, She expected a reaction, fear, tension, a weapon raised. But none came. He simply tore off another strip and set it on the ground beside him. She stopped a few feet away, her silver hair plastered to her face, her breath fogging in the cold air. Up close, she saw the lines of his face, scars carved by battles long before this planet. His eyes weren't wild or cruel. They were steady, the kind that said, "I've seen worse." The forest around them quieted. Even the predators in the mist seemed to hesitate, as if recognizing something dangerous was standing at the center of their domain. She crouched slowly and picked up the strip of meat, never breaking eye contact. It was warm, fresh. He had hunted it himself. She bit into it, not because she trusted him, but because something inside her wanted to know why he wasn't afraid. The taste was rough but good. It grounded her in a way she hadn't expected. Finally, she spoke. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low and sharp. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes hardened with quiet defiance. "Neither should you," he said. She stared at him, realizing with a strange chill that he meant it. Not as a threat, but as a truth they shared. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the only thing on this world that belonged here. The night dragged on, but neither of them moved away. The storm raged, the predators circled, and in the middle of it all, two creatures who had survived everything else simply sat in silence, firelight flickering between them. She had spent her entire life thinking she was the storm. But now she could feel it, this human was one too. Not loud, not wild, just steady. And in the dark heart of the death world, she began to understand what it meant to meet something that did not fear the storm. It became a quiet truth in the rain. She wasn't the only predator here anymore. The forest lay wrapped in thick gray mist the next morning, the kind of silence that came before storms, the kind of silence that could crush even the strongest heartbeat. The alien girl moved through the undergrowth like a whisper, her feet leaving no trace in the black soil. She had spent 2 nights watching this human, waiting for the forest to claim him. She had seen death eat everything here, beasts, council soldiers, entire colonies. But the human remained. He didn't flee the predators. He didn't avoid the storms. He moved through them as if they were simply obstacles in his path, not monsters waiting to tear him apart. And that unsettled her more than any hunter's roar. She perched on a twisted root above his camp, watching him as he prepared for the day. He woke before the first predator's cry, before the sun fought its way through the clouds, before she could even hear the usual low tremor of crawling beasts. He didn't stretch, didn't groan like the soft council explorers she had killed long ago. He rose with quiet, practiced precision, like someone who had lived their entire life knowing that anything slower meant death. His hands moved fast. Fire extinguished, shelter dismantled, gear packed and secured. Every step clean, deliberate, leaving no trace behind. She tilted her head, narrowing her eyes. It wasn't just survival. It was instinct. It was as if this place belonged to him too. A sound snapped through the fog like a bone breaking. The long, drawn-out scream of a ridgeback, one of the death world's most feared creatures. Even she avoided them unless she was forced to fight. They were fast, armored, their jaws capable of crushing steel. She shifted, expecting to see the human retreat into the trees. But he didn't. He turned toward the sound and began walking toward it. Slowly, calmly, she clenched her fists around the damp root. Either he was insane or he was something far worse. She followed him from above, keeping to the branches as he descended into the ridge where the fog was thickest. The ground here was soft, wet, perfect for hiding a predator's approach. She saw it before he did, or so she thought. The ridgeback was crouched in the muck, its long jaws half submerged, waiting for him to step closer. She tensed, ready to strike. But the human stopped 3 steps before the creature's kill zone, his hand resting lightly on the knife at his belt. His breath didn't change. His pulse didn't spike. She could feel the air shift around him, like the storm itself was holding its breath. Then the ridgeback lunged. It moved faster than most council soldiers could even register, a blur of armored muscle and teeth. But the human was faster. He dropped low, sliding beneath the creature's jaw as if he'd done it 100 times before, his knife flashing once. A single, brutal strike. The beast's momentum carried it forward another 5 steps before it collapsed into the mud. Its throat opened so cleanly it didn't even have time to scream again. The human rose slowly, wiping his blade on the creature's hide. No panic. No celebration. Just quiet, efficient death. Her breath caught in her throat. Even she didn't kill ridgebacks that easily. And this human did it like it was nothing. She moved closer, keeping to the trees, watching him as he examined the corpse. Not to admire his kill, but to use it. He stripped its armored plates with practiced ease, cutting them into pieces he could carry. He didn't take everything, just what he needed, then melted back into the forest like a shadow. She crouched on the branch, staring down at the blood spreading through the mud. She had believed herself the apex predator of this world. But watching him move, she began to realize the truth. He wasn't challenging her throne. He didn't even recognize it existed. He was simply part of the storm. The day passed in silence as she trailed him through the twisted forest. He didn't wander like prey. He moved with purpose, following invisible paths between shifting roots, drinking from pools she knew were safe without testing them. He avoided the sinkholes without looking down. She realized with a strange, growing unease that he was reading this world as easily as she could. Deathworlders had instincts. They didn't need maps. And this human moved like one of them. As the sun bled red into the horizon, a storm rolled in again. The wind rose with a low, dangerous hum, and the trees began to twist, their branches closing like claws. The girl dropped to the ground, landing softly on the damp earth, staying in the shadow of a root as she watched him set up camp. She wanted to approach. She told herself it was only because she needed to know if he was a threat. But deep down, something else pushed at her chest. It was curiosity. It was the unfamiliar feeling of seeing someone who didn't fear the same things she did. She stepped out of the shadows finally, her blade in hand. He looked up before she made a sound, his eyes finding hers in the dark as if the forest itself had told him she was coming. No surprise, no fear, just calm. "You again," he said, his voice low, almost like he'd expected this moment all along. She circled slowly, watching him, waiting for a flash of aggression. It never came. He didn't reach for his weapon. He didn't posture like council soldiers had. He just stood there, steady as stone. "You killed a ridgeback," she said flatly, her voice carrying through the hiss of the rain. "And?" he replied, not as a boast, but as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "No one kills ridgebacks like that," she snapped. He tilted his head slightly, rain dripping from his soaked hair. "Then maybe no one's tried the right way." Her jaw tightened. She wasn't used to this. Someone standing in front of her without bowing, without trembling, without treating her like a monster. She was used to being the strongest thing in any room, but this human didn't act like she was a threat. He looked at her like an equal. It was infuriating. It was unsettling. She clenched her fist around her blade, then slowly lowered it, unsure why. The wind howled as the storm swallowed the sky completely, thunder shaking the trees. Without warning, the ground trembled beneath them, the unmistakable rumble of a storm pack, dozens of night beasts moving as one. She'd fought packs before. They devoured everything in their path. She turned to face the sound, readying herself. But when she glanced back at him, she froze. He wasn't preparing to run. He was stepping forward. In that instant, she understood something bone-deep and terrifying. The human didn't just survive this world. He belonged to it. He didn't flinch when death approached. He welcomed it. The pack burst through the tree line, a wave of claws and snarling teeth. But the human didn't hesitate. He moved like lightning, each step purposeful, each strike clean. She joined him because she had to. But as they fought, she realized something she had never admitted before. She was matching him, not outpacing him. Blow for blow, kill for kill, the storm bent around them, and the predators fell one by one. When the last beast collapsed, the rain still pouring over their blood-soaked camp, The human simply wiped his blade and stood, his chest rising evenly. No boasting, no roars of victory, just quiet, unshakable. And for the first time in her life, the alien girl who had grown up believing she was the strongest felt the sharp, undeniable truth settle deep in her bones. She had finally met something as strong as the storm, and it was human. The night storm howled louder than it had in months, hammering the jungle canopy like war drums as the alien girl and the human stood surrounded by the mangled bodies of the storm pack. The air was thick with the stench of wet earth and iron blood. The lightning flickered, painting the clearing in stark flashes of silver and red. She was panting hard, not from weakness but from the shock of it. Shock that someone had fought beside her as an equal. All her life, she had believed herself unmatched on this death world. No creature could keep pace with her. No hunter could match her strikes. But this human had not only matched her. He had moved like the storm itself. And that realization settled deep in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, spreading ripples she couldn't quite understand. He stood beside her, soaked to the bone, blood streaking across his jaw, his blade dripping crimson into the mud. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't even breathing hard. His calm unsettled her more than the monsters ever could. This planet had crushed hundreds before him. Even the council soldiers, trained, armored, arrogant, had screamed before the end. But this man had not screamed. He had looked death in the eyes and moved forward. She clenched her fists, her claws biting into her own palms. "You shouldn't be alive," she said sharply over the roaring rain. He didn't look at her. He simply sheathed his blade with a quiet click, like what they'd just done wasn't survival against impossible odds, but something he'd done 100 times before. "Neither should you," he answered. Her breath hitched. No one spoke to her like that. No one dared. When others saw her, they saw a predator, a myth, a thing that didn't bleed. They lowered their voices, their eyes, their weapons. But this human looked at her as if she were exactly like him. Just another creature fighting to survive. She hated it. She hated how much it rattled the quiet, unshakable image she had built around herself. She stepped closer, the mud sucking at her boots. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" she demanded. He finally turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers through the rain. "Earth," he said simply, as if that explained everything. She frowned, unsatisfied. "That's not an answer." He smirked faintly, not a boastful smirk, not the kind she'd seen on overconfident council soldiers, but a weary, quiet one. "Then it's the only one I have," he said. "Where I'm from, if you can't fight, you don't get to keep breathing." His voice wasn't hard, but it was heavy. There was history behind it, the kind that doesn't come from training halls or council academies. The kind that comes from blood. She felt something cold settle at the base of her spine. This human didn't just know how to kill. He had lived in a place that made killers. The wind shifted through the trees, bringing with it the low, guttural growl of more creatures moving in the distance. The storm always brought predators in waves, testing the edges of strength. She instinctively turned toward the sound, readying herself for another fight. But he didn't. He didn't tense up or draw his blade. He just glanced at her, calm, almost casual. "They won't come close now," he said. She frowned. "How do you know?" He tilted his head toward the ring of carcasses at their feet. "Because they know when they're not the top of the food chain anymore." The way he said it, so certain, so quiet, made something in her chest tighten. She looked out into the dark forest, and for the first time since she was a child, she noticed something she had never experienced on this planet before. Silence that wasn't hunting her. The predators in the mist weren't moving closer. They were staying away, because of him, because he had turned their hunt into their warning. Her storm world didn't respect speeches or bloodlines. It only respected strength. And this human had spoken in the only language the wild understood. She stood in the rain for a long moment, studying him, her claws flexing against her wet palms. He didn't notice her stare, or maybe he did and simply didn't care. He crouched down and began carving through the largest ridgebeast carcass, extracting its spine, plating with smooth, practiced motions. He worked like someone who had done this too many times to count. Not like a conqueror, not like a scavenger, but like someone who simply belonged here. It was that word that burned in her mind, belonged. She had believed she was the only one who belonged to this world. But this human was moving through it like a storm he'd been born in. She stepped closer, her voice low but sharp. "You don't belong here," she said, almost as if saying it out loud would make it true again. He didn't look up from his work. "Maybe," he said, "but this place understands me." The rain pounded against their backs. She wanted to argue, to snarl, to remind him that this was her world, not his. But the beast staying away in the mist told her everything she didn't want to admit. This planet understood him too. As the storm deepened, he built another fire, not the kind that Council explorers used, big and bright and wasteful. His fire was low, controlled, almost invisible against the downpour. It gave off little smoke and enough heat to keep the cold away without attracting unwanted attention. She crouched a few paces away, watching him work. He didn't speak. He didn't try to impress her. He just existed in that quiet way of his, as if the world belonged to him whether anyone liked it or not. When the silence grew too loud to ignore, she finally asked the question that had been chewing at the edges of her mind since the night she first saw his ship cut through the storm. "Why are you here?" He didn't look up immediately. He was threading a strip of bone through the handle of his knife. When he finally answered, it wasn't with a soldier's mission report or the arrogance of an explorer. His voice was low, calm. "Because places like this remind us who we are." She stared at him, confused but unable to look away. "Who are you?" she asked. His lips twitched into that small, tired half-smile again. "Human," he said. "We don't run from monsters. We become the thing they fear." Something shifted in her then, something deep and buried. She had grown up believing she was the storm, the living embodiment of this death world's cruelty and strength. But as she sat there, with the predators hiding in the mist, with the fire low and steady, with the man who didn't fear her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty. Because this human didn't need to prove his strength. He just was. And in a world where only the strong survived, there was nothing more dangerous than someone who didn't need to roar to be feared. The night stretched on. She didn't speak again. Neither did he. But she didn't leave either. They sat in silence, their fire the only warmth in a cold, brutal world. In the distance, the death world watched them. And for the first time in her life, it didn't feel like she was standing alone in it. It felt like the storm itself had split in two. And she wasn't sure whether that terrified her, or made her feel alive again. The storm did not end with the night. It lingered like a living creature, coiling through the valleys and clawing at the trees with wind that could shatter bones. By the fifth sunrise, the alien girl had stopped telling herself she was only watching the human to make sure he died. She had followed him through the storm valleys, across rivers that boiled from underground heat, through fog so thick it ate sound. And in every place where she once walked alone, he was there, cutting through the world as if it were built for him. The forest that had always bowed to her presence no longer answered only to her. It listened to him too, and that changed everything. She crouched on a ledge of slick, black stone overlooking the ravine. Below, the human moved with that infuriating stillness again. He had found a narrow gap between roots the size of starship hulls, an old predator's den, and slipped inside with nothing more than a knife and a rope. She'd seen those dens before. Even she avoided them. They belonged to burrowbacks, massive armored beasts that could snap a grown soldier in half like brittle wood. She'd lost count of how many explorers had died just stepping too close. And yet, this human had walked right in like it was a quiet morning stroll. She leaned forward, frowning into the swirling mist. No sounds came from the hole. No movement. Just the storm pressing down around them, heavy and thick. She almost believed he was dead, that the burrowback had crushed him in the dark. But then, a low roar rolled through the ravine. Not the triumphant bellow of a predator, but the choking sound of something losing. The ground trembled. A moment later, he emerged, dragging the massive creature's carcass behind him. Its armored head split clean down the middle. Her breath caught despite herself. The beast's shell was thick as plated steel, and he had cracked it like brittle bark. His clothes were torn, blood streaked across his arms, but his expression was calm, as if this kill had been just another step in his mourning. He wiped his blade clean on the beast's hide before hauling its bones out like he was gathering firewood. She felt the storm curling around her like it always did when death filled the air. But this time, it wasn't only her it bent to. It bent to him too. She dropped down from the ledge, her boots sinking into the wet earth. He noticed her the moment she landed, of course he did. But he didn't raise his weapon, didn't move like someone surprised. "You keep following me," he said, his voice quiet beneath the rolling thunder. She tilted her head, silver hair slick against her face. "You keep not dying," she replied coldly, though the bite in her words wasn't as sharp as it once was. He gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. "Then I guess we're both doing something right." She walked closer, her eyes narrowing on the broken carcass of the burrowback. "That thing should have torn you apart," she said. "Should have," he answered simply. His hands worked steadily, stripping bones and hide, cutting clean lines with the kind of precision that came from a lifetime of practice. She crouched near the beast, staring at the cracked skull. No one had ever taken down a burrowback alone before, not even her. It wasn't just strength. It was something else, something colder. "How?" she asked. He met her gaze briefly, those dark human eyes giving away nothing. "We're human," he said softly. "We fight until the thing in front of us isn't moving anymore." His words struck something deep in her chest, a place she hadn't touched in years. When she was younger, she had watched her people try to survive this world. One by one, the storms broke them, the beasts devoured them, the darkness swallowed them whole. She had been the only one who adapted fast enough to live. She had built a myth around herself, strongest, last, unbreakable. But this human had walked through everything that killed her people and looked at it like it was familiar. She hated that it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Small. The storm cracked above them, wind whipping their hair into their faces as the forest began to shift. This was no ordinary storm. She knew the signs, the low groaning beneath the ground, the trees bending the wrong way, the air going thick and heavy. A superstorm was coming, one of the planet's true monsters. She had survived only 2 in her entire life, and both had nearly killed her. Every creature in the jungle would be moving now, either running or hiding. She saw him glance at the sky once, calmly, as if the storm were just another opponent to face. "You should find shelter," she said sharply, not even realizing how much urgency bled into her voice. He didn't even look at her. Already did. She followed his gaze toward the remains of the burrowback den. It wasn't just a hole. It went deep, far beneath the surface, where the storm winds couldn't reach. She knew these dens. They were dangerous, but they were also one of the few places where someone could survive the kind of storm that was coming. The idea of hiding there with him twisted her stomach in ways she couldn't explain. She had never shared shelter with anyone. She didn't trust anyone. But she also wasn't foolish enough to die out of pride. When the sky finally broke, it wasn't with rain. It was with screaming wind and black lightning that turned the jungle to ash. The ground trembled as trees snapped like twigs. The storm came like a living god, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing it alone. She followed him down into the den, the darkness swallowing them whole. The walls were close, wet, cold, but the roar outside faded as they moved deeper underground. The human lit a low fire in the corner, using scraps of burrowback shell and dried resin. The flame didn't flicker. It burned steady just like him. She sat against the damp wall, watching him across the fire. The storm outside roared like an animal denied its prey, but down here, the world felt still. She hated the way it made her heart beat harder. He looked up once, catching her stare, and for a moment she felt something unfamiliar. A strange, quiet acknowledgement passing between them. It wasn't trust. It wasn't alliance. It was something older, something carved from survival. She had spent her entire life being the one thing the storm could not break. But here he was, breathing the same air, enduring the same night, refusing to be broken too. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're not like the others," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "What others?" "The council soldiers," she said bitterly. "The ones who thought they could tame this place with their machines. They screamed when the forest looked at them. You don't." He shrugged slightly. "We learned a long time ago that the universe doesn't care about screaming. It only listens to the ones who keep standing." She leaned back, closing her eyes for a heartbeat. The fire popped softly. "I thought I was the strongest," she said quietly, not realizing until the words left her mouth how much truth sat inside them. He didn't laugh. He didn't mock her. His voice was steady. "Then maybe you were. But strength isn't something that lives in one place. It moves. It finds others like itself." His words hung in the darkness like the low growl of something ancient. The storm roared outside, tearing the world apart. Inside, the two of them sat in silence, not as hunter and hunted, not as alien and human, but as two storms that had found each other in the chaos. She looked at him one last time, his face half lit by the soft orange glow. The jungle feared her. The galaxy feared humans. And now, sitting here, she understood why. One storm was dangerous, but two storms together, the galaxy wouldn't stand a chance. The storm outside raged for days, the kind of storm that tore entire valleys apart, the kind that erased everything that was too weak to endure. Trees the size of towers fell like straw. Rivers swelled into black oceans. The air itself howled with a fury that could break bones. Down beneath the earth, in the hollow carved from the burrowback's den, the alien girl sat across from the human, the dim fire between them glowing low and steady. It was the only warmth in a world that felt like it had forgotten mercy. She had spent storms like this before, alone, crouched in silence, her claws dug into the dirt, waiting for the world to stop trying to kill her. But this time was different. This time she wasn't alone. The firelight flickered against the rough walls, casting long shadows over their faces. She kept her eyes on him, on the way he sat with his back against the wall, hands resting loosely on his knees, breathing steady. He didn't fidget. He didn't show fear. He sat there like the storm wasn't even happening. She could hear the world tearing itself apart above them, but his stillness anchored the room. It unsettled her how much that mattered. She wasn't used to needing anyone else's presence to feel safe. She had been her own wall for years. She was the storm, or so she'd always believed. But this human, he didn't try to fight the storm. He existed through it like it had always been a part of him. Hours turned to days. They spoke little, and yet silence didn't feel like it used to. In the past, silence had been a weapon she carried against the world, a warning for anything foolish enough to come close. Now it was something else entirely, a weight shared between them, unspoken but real. She watched him work during the lulls in the storm. He cleaned his weapons without hurry. He sharpened his knife until the edge gleamed. He stripped the burrowback bones and reshaped them into armor plates, movements precise, deliberate. It was the kind of work only a creature born in hard places understood. She found herself studying him the way she used to study the predators that roamed her forest. But this was different. Predators had patterns. They lunged, they killed, they fed. He didn't. He was unpredictable in a way that felt dangerous not because he wanted to harm, but because he didn't need to prove anything. The beasts screamed their strength to the world. He carried his like a quiet knife. On the third night, the ground trembled again as the storm reached its peak. She could hear the shrieks of creatures outside, their cries cut short by wind or water or worse. She closed her eyes, remembering the last superstorm she had survived alone. Her people hadn't been so lucky. She remembered their faces, their blood, their last breaths beneath a black sky. She had walked out of that storm as the only one left standing. That was the day she decided strength was hers alone. That was the day the forest began whispering her name as if she were something more than a girl. But as she sat across from this human now, the same storm pounding the same earth, she realized something she hadn't before. Maybe she had never been strong because she was alone. Maybe she was strong because she had to be. His voice broke through the howling wind above them. "You've lived here a long time," he said quietly, not as a question, but as a truth he already knew. She didn't answer at first, unsure how to shape words she hadn't spoken in years. Her voice was rough when she finally said, "Since I was a child, everyone else died. I didn't." He nodded slowly, like he understood more than he should have. "Yeah," he said, "that's how it happens." She tilted her head, her amber eyes narrowing at him. "And what about you?" she asked. "Where did you learn to fight like this? To move like this? No council soldier can walk through a storm beast den and come out breathing." He leaned his head back against the wall, his expression unreadable. "Earth," he said simply. But this time he didn't leave it there. "We were never given safe worlds. No paradise planets. We learned to survive where we weren't wanted. The ground burned, the skies fell, and the oceans swallowed cities. We kept walking." His voice wasn't proud. It wasn't bragging. It was steady, matter-of-fact, like someone speaking about breathing. She felt her chest tighten at the way he said it. This human wasn't exceptional because he had trained harder or been chosen. He was exceptional because his people were built in the fire. She had always thought humanity was a myth the council exaggerated to keep worlds in line, a cautionary tale of reckless, dangerous creatures. But sitting across from one now, hearing the storm scream above them while he spoke of burning skies, she began to understand why the galaxy feared them. "The council calls humans dangerous," she said slowly. "Monsters wearing soft skin." He gave a short, humorless chuckle. "They're not wrong." She frowned, not sure if she was supposed to take that as a threat or a confession. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her then, and there was something in his eyes that felt older than any war. "Because everything tried to kill us," he said. "And it didn't work." She held his gaze for a long time, and in that quiet, something clicked inside her. A truth so simple it almost hurt. She wasn't special because she was born here. She was strong because the world had tried to kill her and failed. He wasn't strong because of his species alone. He was strong because the universe had done the same to him. They were two storms that had survived different skies. The storm raged on, louder than before, shaking the walls around them. A distant tree cracked like thunder. She flinched slightly without meaning to. He didn't move toward her, didn't offer comfort. He didn't have to. His stillness was enough. It reminded her she wasn't facing this one alone. That realization terrified her. It also warmed something in her chest she didn't have a name for. When the storm finally began to ease, it was not with gentle rain but with a deep, shuddering silence that stretched across the forest like a held breath. She stood first, brushing the damp soil from her hands, her silver hair clinging to her shoulders. He followed without a word, packing his gear like a soldier who'd done it 1,000 times before. When they climbed out of the den, the world above them was wrecked. Entire trees had been ripped from the ground. The air was thick with the scent of blood and earth. The predators had either fled or died. It was quiet. She walked a few steps ahead, scanning the shattered valley. She had walked out of storms like this before, the only living thing left standing. But this time, when she turned, he was walking beside her, calm, steady, covered in scars and rain and silence. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a legend walking out of ruin. She felt like part of something larger, something the galaxy would never understand until it was too late. She stopped and faced him. "You're not supposed to be here," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow, rain dripping from his jaw. "I'm here anyway." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, a sound halfway between a laugh and a growl. "Then maybe this world has room for two storms." He gave her a look, not one of challenge but of quiet recognition. No one had ever stood beside her like this before. No one had survived long enough to try. The council feared humans because they were unpredictable. She feared him because, for the first time, she didn't know where her world ended and where his began. Together, they began walking through the wreckage. The predators hiding in the fog did not follow. The forest watched in silence as two storms walked side by side, leaving a trail that whispered a warning the galaxy would one day learn to fear. The strongest creature on this death world had met her match, and the universe didn't even know yet that it had just created something far more dangerous than either of them alone. And far above them, beneath the dying storm clouds, the wind carried a single truth across the broken forest. Humanity doesn't just survive storms. Humanity becomes them. Thank you for listening to this HFY Sci-Fi story. If you enjoyed this cinematic journey into the power, danger, and quiet strength of humanity, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories among the stars. Your support keeps these stories alive.